So what do you think about this deal?
Yeah, I think you got to look at it at multiple sides. Obviously, the business of the NFL can be ruthless at times. It never fails when you start to think about all the details of what we're dealing with Joe Thuney, being a guy that's creeping upon the mid-30s, 1 year left on the contract, done an outstanding job. He was the team MVP this season, voted internally. And he's one of the more pleasant, down-to-earth dudes. And you guys will appreciate that in Chicago because if you've been around NFL locker rooms, heck, any sports locker room, there are guys that you can approach. There are guys that you have to walk gingerly towards. And then some guys, I think some people may just have to avoid. Joe is a guy that you can always approach. For me as an analyst for the Chiefs Radio Network, I go into the locker room, I interview players after games, wins, losses, etc. He's always accessible, always personable, and he knows how to have that light switch. I mean, you have to have two sides of the coin to be in an NFL and to be a dominant player like he has been. And for a guy to be as ruthless on the field, but as personable off the field, tells you about his professionalism, and then his resume speaks for itself. So I just know I've been around the business. I played. I was a rookie in 1993. Has been a part of the NFL in some aspect from a broadcasting standpoint since I left the game in '99. So I've seen this story before, where there's players out there, teammates that have an allegiance to you. And, in one side, they say, we hate to see him go, but on the other side, you recognize that it's the nature of the beast.
And I know that football games are not won or lost with somebody's character. However, I do think that it's important, Danan, that he reportedly brings an even character and an appreciated one and somewhat of a unifying one in a Bears locker room that I wouldn't say it was necessarily lost or splintered, but where we heard a lot of players speak out in the media about how they didn't like the direction the team was headed in. It resulted in obviously Matt Eberflus getting fired, but I think somebody like this would be a really stable presence. Playoff, obviously, experience, all pro. The resume that he has speaks for itself when it comes to being respected and what he's done.
Absolutely, 100%. I totally agree. He has that contagious attitude, that infectious kind of character that you want to see. When you talk about a team that hasn't really performed up to standard, when you talk about the Bears, and then you hear about the fracturing internally, you need that stabilizing force. And I think Joe Thuney has shown throughout his career, whether it was with New England and then here in Kansas City, he knows how to be a champion. He knows how to be professional. And he knows how to be a guy that guys can rally around. He's going to be a guy in that locker room that's going to be like, dude, stop complaining. Let's just go to work. It's not that bad. Let's go to work. We got a job to do. And that's where you need those kind of forces. Yeah, you can have the outspoken voices, and you need a complement of that. But you also need the guys that's just going to get down and dirty, be a gritty team player, and comes in with the resume that he has, a four-time All-Pro, four-time Super Bowl champion. I mean, what more could you ask for if you're trying to stabilize your offensive line and be that force? I mean, he has more. I think I read something where he has more first-team All-Pros than the entire Chicago Bears offensive line since 1990.
Are you surprised? Are you surprised it only took a next year's fourth then?
To be honest, I am not surprised in this business at all anymore. I mean, nothing fails to shock me. The fact that you're talking about from a player standpoint, if you're talking about Mecole Hardman, if you're talking about maybe some of the local Kansas City media, you'd hope for more because of his resume, especially with what he was able to accomplish this past season with moving from the guard to the tackle position when we were desperate, and how he fared out there on the left tackle position. But from a business standpoint, look at the numbers, look what you're freeing up. you recognize that even though you're looking to ship guys off like Joe Thuney, other teams are recognizing that you need to ship guys off like Joe Thuney. So there are teams out there that are not going to break the bank for you from a draft capital standpoint because they know you have to unleash somebody that's going to free up what did it, I saw 12 to 16 million in cap space. So the supply and demand is a factor. You'd like, because of how he performed in Kansas City, you would have liked to get more. But you can also understand the business that with 1 year left, he's going to have to redo a contract or get a new contract in Chicago. Nobody is going to break the bank for him personally when he gets to that destination, and then also open up the bank for you to take some assets from them or more assets from him by trading him. I've seen a lot, so I'm not too surprised, but I will say we lost a great one that will be in the Hall of Honor for the Kansas City Chiefs in the future.
Okay, so you talked about Thuney playing obviously both guard and tackle this past season. I'm just curious as to what you thought about the way he played tackle and how much he can help a team in a pinch if they need somebody with some versatility, because we know what his reputation is at the guard position.
Being around the NFL, it's always about the more you can do. And there's no better example this past season than what we saw Joe Thuney and what he was able to accomplish. It wasn't just that he was serviceable out at the left tackle. He was strong. He was dominant. You can probably say he was one of the top 5 or 10 left tackles in the league when he played there. That just tells you about his makeup, his work ethic, and his attitude and his approach. So, if you're a teammate, you can't help. See, there's some guys, being in that locker room, there are some guys that you can't help but work harder because you're working alongside. And I think that's what you can see when you talk about Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, who they franchise tag, and that's part of the reason why they were open to letting Joe Thuney go, because you can't have that much money tied up between your two guards and your center. But from a tackle standpoint, I think if you're Ryan Poles, if you're the Chicago Bears, you are happy to get an all-pro left guard, but you also know in the back pocket that if things go awry and there are issues that come up, which at times they do, you can move a guy out that's versatile enough to play the left tackle and be a Band-Aid, a really, really good Band-Aid for you while you go through that adversity.
And Danan, that was something that I was thinking about in all of this was you knew, given Kansas City's cap issues, once they decided to franchise tag Trey Smith, that somebody was probably going to have to go. Was this a thought? Did Thuney cross your mind, or did you have other people in play that might also be casualties?
I think the key word in that question is once, or the key part of that question was once they franchised Trey Smith. Prior to that, I thought maybe they could figure out a way to keep all three, or maybe even allow Trey Smith to go out and be on the free agent market. But once they franchised Trey, I knew that it was only a matter of time that Joe Thuney would be expendable. And you also have to realize with what the Chiefs have done in the past 2 drafts, we look at the bright, shiny coins of the Xavier Worthies and the Rashee Rices, but we also used up early capital on offensive linemen in Wanye Morris and Kingsley Suamataia. And you have to try to figure out, you can't just ship those guys out. You have to figure out if they can be serviceable, if not at the tackle position, maybe at an interior line position. So it sounds like Kingsley is going to have an opportunity to earn that left guard position. And then now that opens the door up for them to go shopping on the free agent market and get a left tackle, which was desperately needed. So I don't know how many times you can go early in the draft to the well of offensive linemen and not utilize them. So getting creative with Kingsley and figuring out what they're going to do with Wanye, who they moved to right tackle for a little bit at the end of the season as well, trying to get some mileage out of those guys is part of the reason why they felt like they can get rid of Joe Thuney.
I think it's important what you said, and we played the Thuney comments after they lost the Super Bowl, and that was my first thought was, there he is. Like that, the fact that that's the guy who is there and standing up and is there at his locker or available after a loss.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, well, with the Chiefs, that's really not all that often, frankly. I mean, some of the Bears teams I covered, that was every week, and you knew who those guys were. By the end of the year, you talk about how it reveals character. But it's one thing where the team almost never loses.
Yeah, and it tells you a lot about his makeup and how he can be an effective force and leader in an organization. And how rarely do we say that a left guard can galvanize an organization? But I think Joe Thuney has that makeup to do so. And you think about when we got him, we were reeling. We went and played in the Super Bowl against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We were exposed because of injuries at the offensive line, and Patrick Mahomes ran backwards and sideways for, I believe, 498 yards in that game, running for his life in that Super Bowl. And we got blown out. And immediately Brett Veach went to the market and said, you know what, we got to fix this. We got to get this fixed, and we're going to make it happen. And they did that with the draft and Joe Thuney, and it equated to 3 straight Super Bowl appearances and 2 Super Bowl wins. And you got a lot out of him from not just a winning perspective, but also from a leadership perspective. So I feel like, this is the nature of the beast in the business side, but at the same time, you recognize how great Joe Thuney has been for this organization, the success that we've experienced because of players like him. You wish him the best. You just know that this is just part of the business.
I also then worry because when Brett Veach decides to part ways with somebody, you wonder why. And this is no shade on Joe Thuney, but it's a fair question given their assessment of talent and timing. What do you think about just the way that Kansas City's been able to do that so well?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, here's part of it is that if you were shipping him to someone who did not have history and experience with the Chiefs organization, I think that could be a valid question. But Poles came here from Kansas City. He knows the inner workings of each player as well as how the organization works. So for that trust level to be heightened as it is, I don't think there's anything to really be concerned about. I mean, he finished the season. He's been an Iron Man since he's been in the league, started 146 games of 146 games. Like, I don't think that there's really any meat on the bone there in regards to concern. Now, anything can happen. I mean, we've seen that with L'Jarius Sneed. We've seen that with other players that have departed. But I don't think there's anything to be worried about at this point. I think he can be a staple of your offensive line from a leadership standpoint and production standpoint.
Danan, I have to say you sound a little overall disappointed in this. And for whatever reason, I kind of like that.
Oh, man.
That makes me, I'm just being honest, it makes me feel good as a Bears fan that you're a little let down. I wonder, though, had the Bears not made this trade, would he have been waived? Is it possible he could have been signed as a free agent?
Yeah, I don't know with the salary cap hit that would have been taken. I don't know if that would have been the casualty factor in it. But I think this is a graceful way and a respectful way for an organization and a great player to kind of part ways. So, yeah, I am not happy about it at all. I mean, scrambling through the locker room, as you mentioned, leading into this interview, that we hadn't experienced very many losses. So to go into the locker room at times when we have lost, looking for guys to speak to who are not going to be giving me one-word answers or be difficult interviews was a rarity at times, but Joe Thuney always stepped up to the plate, very respectful, eye-to-eye communication, handshakes, very personable. So, yeah, it is definitely, when you lose one of those type of guys, it's definitely something that the Chiefs Kingdom will feel for some time, but you recognize that we got to make something happen, especially with the way we lost that Super Bowl.
$16 million hit, by the way, this year, which is a lot less than the $26.9 million of last year. Just to me, this is real simple. He's the older player between him and Trey Smith, so you keep the young guy. I mean, that's kind of how I saw it, Danan. Is that the way you're looking at it?
Yeah, I think so. And then also, if you would have gotten some mileage out of Wanye Morris or Kingsley Suamataia at the left tackle position and you didn't really feel like you had to address that, then maybe you could figure something out with Joe Thuney. But now with the holes that need to be filled at that tackle position, I just don't feel like you would tie up as much money into the entire offensive line as you would have had to if you kept Joe Thuney. So, once you got Trey Smith, I think that's a component, and you franchise him for sure. But if you had the luxury of having a right tackle and left tackle starting based on drafting them in the last 2 years with Wanye and Kingsley, I think you could maybe make some concessions at the guard position that might have kept them.
Danan Hughes, thanks so much for popping on to talk about the news. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks, Danan.